BC has experienced an average of 6 deaths every day of every week for 2 years due to toxic drugs.
Tonight, startling statistics from a new report on BC's opioid crisis.
This declaration, a state of emergency, to me, it's just words.
Plus, frontline workers say the Yukon government's drug strategy is falling short.
And your peep sight, so you look through here when you pull back.
And archery hits a bullseye at the Arctic Winter Games for the first time in 50 years. Good evening, Tansei Anine. Welcome to APTN National News. I'm Daryl Stranger. 5 RCMP officers in Prince George, BC are facing charges following the in-custody death of Dale Culver, a member of the Gitxsan-Wet'suwet'en Nations. Culver died while detained by police in July of 2017. His case was profiled by Lee Wilson in a 2017 APTN Investigates episode. 2 officers face manslaughter charges, and 3 are alleged to have attempted to obstruct justice following the arrest. In a written release, Culver's family says it has taken too long for the charges to be laid. His aunt, Virginia Pierre, wrote in part, "We cannot shake off the devastation until justice is done. We hurt each time we see police-involved deaths in the news. It happens way too much. Too many have died in the hands of the RCMP." And as they prepare for court proceedings, the family is planning to speak directly with media in the coming weeks. And it's been just over a year since the Yukon government declared a substance use health emergency. While the territory's health and social services minister says the declaration has been a positive step for Yukoners, some people with first-hand knowledge of Yukon's addictions crisis say they're not convinced. Here's Sarah Connors with that story.
There's when he was a little boy. He used to have this dog called Bam Bam, and oh man, he loved Bam Bam.
John Smarch has fond memories of his nephew, Travis Smarch. Travis was a citizen of the Carcross-Tagish First Nation. His uncle remembers him as a social and caring person who could easily make others laugh.
He was always worried about the other guy, and sticking up for people and helping others. He was a good young man when he was alive.
Smarch says, like many others in the Yukon, Travis struggled with addictions. The 27-year-old died in the first week of January in 2022 from a drug overdose. He was one of 8 people in the territory to die from illicit drug use during a 3-week span in January 2022.
Today, I am declaring a substance use health emergency in the Yukon Territory.
In response to the deaths, the Yukon government declared a substance use health emergency on January 20th, 2022.
We've had a tremendous response with respect to our partners. There are many programs, enhancements of services that have happened over the last year.
That includes the creation of a mobile paramedic unit at the Whitehorse Emergency Shelter focused on harm reduction, and renovating the territory's supervised consumption site to incorporate an inhalation hood. McPhee says almost 2,000 people visited the site in 2022, up from 77 people in 2021.
It's an opportunity for people to use drugs in a safe way, and the inhalation hood has increased the number of people that go there. We've had almost 2,000 people.
This declaration, a state of emergency, to me, it's just words. They're just blank words.
Karen Niklu is a Notchonayak First Nation citizen and a recovering addict and alcoholic. She works with street people at the Whitehorse Emergency Shelter. In October 2022, Yukon government handed over responsibility of the shelter to the Council of Yukon First Nations and nonprofit organization Connective. Yukon government continues to provide funding to the shelter.
The shelter is still the shelter. It's the place where people go to use, the people where they go to drink. Like
Niklu wants to see stricter rules at the shelter, easier access to funding, and safe spaces for people living in communities. She says she won't believe things have improved in the territory until those changes happen.
They say it over and over again, the government, we're meeting them where they're at, but they're not. They're keeping them where they're at.
McPhee says she understands people have concerns and is adamant her government is putting in the work so people who use substances have options and support.
I think the numbers indicate that there has been a positive change. Is it enough? No. Will it ever be enough? Probably not, but we will continue to work on it. We will continue to work with our partners and be dedicated.
As for Smarch, who's a recovering alcoholic himself, he hopes to see increased on-the-land healing options. It's something Yukon government is working on with its First Nations partners.
But I do think there is people who are trying and who are trying to get the programming out to people, the people who need it.
He hopes by sharing his nephew's story, others will be inspired to reach out for help if they need it.
I'm always hoping and praying that we can do a lot more for our people and for others who are struggling.
Sarah Connors, APTN National News, Whitehorse.
BC's chief coroner just released some grim statistics regarding the devastating impact the opioid crisis has had. APTN's Tina House has this story.
Since the opioid epidemic was announced in 2016, 11,000 people have lost their lives from the toxic drug supply that has devastated communities across BC.
BC has experienced an average of 6 deaths every day of every week for 2 years due to toxic drugs, and these deaths were preventable.
LaPointe says men between 30 to 59 years old made up 70% of those deaths.
Provincially, from November 2021 to October 22, deaths due to drug toxicity came second only to cancers in terms of potential years of life lost in our province. And the average age of someone dying from drug toxicity was 44 years old. These are population characteristics, but we all know, of course, that these numbers represent people who were loved, who were valued, and who are now greatly missed. Some had been experiencing problematic substance use for a number of years. Others used substances occasionally. Some sought opioids. Others believed they had purchased stimulants and died unaware that what they purchased on the illicit market contained fentanyl.
And one of those victims was sports journalist Jason Botchford, who accidentally overdosed at the age of 48 years old in 2019, leaving behind his wife Catherine to raise their 3 young children alone.
His secret became my secret, which became this harboring shame that I carried for a year. I was so fearful that people would judge him and tear down his legacy. I was fearful that people would judge me for not knowing. And even worse, I feared people would treat my children's loss of their father as insignificant because of how he died.
Dr. Nell Wyman is the acting Chief Medical Health Officer for the First Nations Health Authority.
First Nations people continued to be overrepresented in the harms and fatal consequences of toxic drug poisonings. Although First Nations people represent only 3.2% of the provincial population, they accounted for just over 15% of all toxic drug deaths in the province in both 2021 and the first half of 2022. First Nations people are dying at over 5 times the rate of other BC residents. Also in the First Nations data, First Nations women are disproportionately impacted. During the first half of 2022, First Nations women died at 8.8 times the rate of other BC female residents.
BC Premier David Eby says his government is prepared to do whatever they can to stop the crisis. He just decriminalized possession of small amounts of heavy drugs.
All parties focus on an evidence-based approach around drug policy because when you talk to parents who have lost a kid who thought they were taking some kind of a party drug at an event and ended up taking fentanyl and dying, you understand how serious this issue is and how it crosses partisan lines and how we all need to work on solutions.
For Catherine Botchford, who has been left to pick up the pieces after her loss, says that eliminating the stigma is crucial.
We all have a responsibility to change the narrative on substance use and the stigma associated with it. I stand here today to tell my story with hopes it will give courage to others to start their conversation about addiction and substance use, and perhaps through those conversations it will lead to a healthier alternative.
Tina House, APTN National News, Vancouver.
Waste not, want not. That's the motto of a new Hydro-Quebec and Atikamekw agreement. The Atikamekw community of Opitziwan will begin to use sawmill waste to power its community. Right now, Opitziwan is powered by diesel. The community, about 600 kilometers north of Montreal, is now in partnership with Hydro-Quebec. Their band council plans to build an off-grid forest biomass cogeneration plant that will convert tree waste into energy by 2026. Onimiskyo Opitziwan is the working group leading the project. Vice President Yvonne Rock Awashish says the plant will lower CO2 emissions by 325 tons over 25 years.
Considérant que présentement, l'ensemble de la biomasse produite par la scierie, c'est-à-dire l'écorce et les résidus de bois, sont envoyés à des centaines de kilomètres d'Obidjouan, c'est cette même biomasse forestière qui alimentera la future centrale, ce qui veut dire, et c'est très important de le préciser, qu'aucune coupe supplémentaire de bois ne sera nécessaire sur le territoire.
All right, it's time to step aside for a quick break, find out what happened at the Arctic Winter Games today when we come back. Welcome back to APTN National News. It's day 5 at the Arctic Winter Games in Wood Buffalo, Alberta, and these games are more than just a showcase of exciting sports. APTN's Charlotte Moore-Jacobs explains.
Well, the Yukon had a huge day yesterday, dominating with 30 gold Ulus, bringing their total Ulu count to 81. Team Alaska is close behind now, sitting with 23 gold Ulus and 73 medals in standing. And Alberta North is now sitting at 60 overall, while Team NT has a respected 49 Ulus. Extreme cold weather has been a factor for the games, unfortunately, postponing events like biathlon and cross-country skiing. With the cold weather sticking around, we're not sure if those will be postponed even further. But APTN's Chris Stewart will be indoors covering events such as wrestling, along with women's futsal, with a competition between Team Sampi and Team NT this evening. But you're probably wondering about the exhibit behind me. Well, this is the Orange Shirt Every Child Matter exhibit, honoring residential and intergenerational school survivors. It's part of the game's cultural programming and Truth and Reconciliation pin series. The host society for the 2023 Arctic Winter Games has a variety of events focused on educating the public on Indigenous issues as well as Indigenous teachings. I'll have a full report on how the game is implementing acts of reconciliation on tomorrow's newscast. And as you can see, the games are so much more than just sports. A cultural gala will take place tonight and tomorrow. I attended the dress rehearsal and I was absolutely wowed at the level of song, dance, and theatrics from groups across the circumpolar north. Definitely want to catch that. There's still so much here to do and see at the games. Now back to you in studio.
Thanks so much for that, Charlotte. Going to the ice now, women's figure skating held its medal rounds. 5 skaters competed for the gold Ulu in a level 3 competition. 2 skaters from northern Alberta, 2 from Alaska, and a skater from the Northwest Territories were cheered on by the enthusiastic crowd. In the end, it was Lily Brennan from the NWT who had the sharpest program and took home the gold Ulu.
I did well. I got first and I had 2 personal best scores.
That's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
What do you think of the games themselves?
I think it's really fun. I was at Arctic Winter Games in 2018 and it was a lot of fun. Definitely a different experience this time, but yeah, just an overall good experience.
The men's and women's Dene Hand Games were also played today in Fort McMurray. One team hides a token in their hands, and the opponent's team captain tries to point to the hand that it is in and gains a stick if they're right. If you win all the sticks, then you win the game. For the men's, Team Alaska took on Team Nunavut, with Alaska taking home the victory. And for the women, the Northwest Territories also played Nunavut. In this game, Alaska took the win.
This is my first time ever competing in hand games. We don't play it in Alaska. I've played it maybe once or twice, but it's never been this serious. So we've never done an actual competition where we have all the sticks and the drummers, so this is really intense and fun. So we're just doing our best and lucky enough to win, having fun.
I get to represent like my hometown and for like my family, and just to show them that, I don't know, make them proud, I guess.
Well, after nearly 50 years, archery is an official sport at this year's Arctic Winter Games. Charlotte Jacobs takes us to the archery range to meet some of the competitors.
What started out as a tool for hunting on the land and a recreational pastime is quickly becoming a competitive pursuit. And today at the 2023 Arctic Winter Games, 15-year-old Tayden Schott of Fort McKay First Nation gets to show off his skills on home turf.
The nearest archery range is an hour and 30 minutes away from where I'm from.
It's the first time since 1974 that the Arctic Winter Games has had an archery contingent, with teams from Northwest Territories, Yukon, and Alberta North competing in both compound and bareboat.
And your peep sight, so you look through here when you pull back.
With so much hardware, Schott says the hardest part is
probably just sighting in my bowl.
When it comes to fun, archery is a bullseye for Schott. He's also sponsored by his First Nation for gear. And without financial help, he says the cost can be a barrier for youth hoping to level up.
My boat costed $3,000, just stock, no sights, no rest. But my boat right now is at probably $4,000.
Schott's coach says with the introduction of archery as an official sport at the Arctic Winter Games, there's been a lot of curiosity about the competition.
They get a lot of mental growth as well, a lot of mental discipline, because especially when you come to a competition, there's a lot of focus, but it's a very individual sport, so we definitely can fit a different dynamic of person that maybe isn't to a hockey or a team sport.
For only being involved in a sport for about a year, Gitxsan-Wet'suwet'en is a sharpshooter. Hailing from Bushacombe, Northwest Territories, this 15-year-old started off as many do, a cheap bow and a target set up in the backyard.
Once that got worn out, I was like, okay, my arrows are starting to break, so I looked up online if there's any archer story, like.
Wet'suwet'en also enhanced his technique through watching online instructional videos.
Get a good anchor point so I know where to put my string every time. That really helped, made my shots more consistent.
His biggest motivator? Family.
Every now and then when I shoot in the back, my dad's like watching me, like, that was a really good shot. And that really gave me momentum to keep on going.
It's Wet'suwet'en's first time traveling as a team and competing in a large venue, a big step in his archery career.
After this, if I look back and I'm like, that was really good, I might think about talking to my coach again for a bow upgrade.
While it may take a lot of concentration, for Schott, keeping his eye on the prize means not taking himself too seriously.
I try to relax when I shoot, so like dancing and singing.
Charlotte Jacobs, APTN National News, Fort McMurray, Treaty 8 Territory.
Well, it's so great to see the games back in full swing. It certainly looks like everyone is enjoying their time. All right, it's time for one final break. Our photo of the day and weather are still to come. Welcome back. It's time now for our photo of the day. Dana Kelly shared this shot of the sun shining through the poplar trees on a cold morning in Kennesoda, Manitoba, a small Métis community on the west side of Lake Manitoba. It's a great photo there, Dana. If you want to be featured as our next photo of the day, email your shots to share@aptn.ca or tag us on Instagram. All right, now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Starting over on the east coast, 2 degrees in St. John's and -3 in Halifax, -5 in Cartwright, and -11 in Happy Valley Goose Bay. -5 in Clear in Quebec City and -2 in Clear in Montreal. -13 in Toronto and -2 in London. -22 in Clear in Sudbury and -23 in Clear in Big Trout Lake. -28 in Churchill and -22 in Thompson. -20 in Barons River and -18 in Snow in Winnipeg. +1 in Swift Current and -9 in Saskatoon. -19 in Snow in Stony Rapids and -9 in Buffalo Narrows. Moving west, snow and -16 in Fort Chipewyan and -11 in Fort McMurray. 2 degrees in Edmonton and 5 in Calgary. 9 in Vancouver and 8 in Campbell River. 7 degrees in Sandspit and -15 in Fort Nelson. -8 in Whitehorse and -25 in Old Crow. Some snow and -31 in Norman Wells and -24 in Yellowknife. -31 in Fort McPherson and -30 in Nuvik. -34 in Baker Lake and -32 in Arviat. -38 in Iqaluit and -32 in Iqaluit. The Canadian Academy of Arts and Sciences have announced their list of nominees for this year's Juno Awards. Here are the Indigenous nominees. Blackie and the Rodeo...
That was our first group of nominees. We got 3 more to get to.
Blackie and the Rodeo Kings got the nod for Contemporary Roots Album of the Year. And Contemporary Indigenous Artist or Group, Asanabi, Digging Roots, the late Vince Fontaine's group Indian City, Julian Taylor, and Susan Aglukark. Obegizi and Tanya Takak are up for Alternative Album of the Year, with Winnipeg's Andrew Balfour for Classical Album of the Year. Crystal Shawanda is in the Contemporary Blues category. Nehiao Soul, Iva and Angu, Joel Wood, Northern Cree, and the Barehead Sisters are in the Traditional Indigenous category. And for the 52nd year in a row, Ernest Monias, the undisputed King of the North, has not received a nomination for a Juno Award. And the Juno Awards will be held in Edmonton at Rogers Place on Monday, March the 13th. All right, and Nation to Nation has your Need to Know from the Hill as the House resumes. Here's a preview.
There's a famous line from a famous movie in the 90s that goes, "Show me the money." And that's what critics are saying after it was revealed that Indigenous Services Canada and Crown Indigenous Relations returned billions of unspent dollars to the federal treasury. But why?
There seems to be a false impression that the money has disappeared and has not been distributed to Indigenous communities.
We're also getting Inuit input on Canada's proposed gun legislation and catching up with an Algonquin elder who's speaking up for Indigenous languages. That's coming up tonight on Nation to Nation, just ahead of the news.
Well, you can catch that in just a few minutes from now, so don't go anywhere. That is all we have for you on this Thursday edition of APTN National News. For all of us here, thank you so much for joining us, Miigwech, and have a great night.